Hey, welcome back. On my way home, I am Miss Mandy, and today we are talking about spouses, significant others, anybody you might share financial responsibility for your life with, whether that's your parents who you live with, or manage money for and with as they get older, or if you have a different living situation. I think that it's a hot spot no matter what situation you're in, but before we start, I want you to understand where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a place where I am married to the person I share financial responsibilities with, and we have combined finances. And we chose to do that as a young couple because we just couldn't survive with our finances separated. We didn't make enough money to even really consider that, and we weren't organized enough to split out bills in that way. So we combined our finances at that time out of necessity, but I kind of love it because I feel like it gives a level of transparency to our finances. And there's a couple ways I'll talk about in a minute that we navigate having our own funds and those kinds of things. But first I want to talk about how we communicate. And we as in all of us, how we in general should communicate or can communicate with our significant others about finances, because we're not taught how to do this. We might be taught how to, write a check. I was taught how to write a check in middle school, but I was never taught how to talk about money. My parents never talked with me about money. And as a parent, I can understand why, because you don't want your kids to have that kind of burden on them. You don't want them to think about, whether we're doing well with money or whether we're not doing well with money. You don't want them to feel entitled if you have a lot of money, and you don't want them to feel burdened if you don't have a lot of money. But I think it is important to communicate about money, and it's important to learn how to communicate. We're not born naturally good at it. We have to practice it, and it's just not something people talk a lot about. You might have that initial discussion. I don't know. We never met with a priest before we got married, or a pastor that talked about money. But it might be part of your initial discussions, but you have to learn how to continue those discussions. And I just want to go over a few thoughts that I had about this subject. I'm stopped by a train, by the way, so we're not going anywhere anytime soon. So first of all, to communicate about money with your spouse, your significant other, whoever it is, you have to have a shared vision. You have to understand where this person is coming from and where they're going to. Because if you're sharing financial responsibilities with a person and they have one goal and you have another goal, it's like pulling a rope in two opposite directions, or even if you're not in opposite directions, it's not the same direction, so you're not going to go as far as fast. And in some cases, if you are heading in opposite directions, you're going to completely cancel out each other's efforts. So I think you have to know what your partner's vision is, what they want out of their money, what they expect to do with their money. If you're here, you're probably into building wealth and finding ways to enhance the quality of your life. You have to figure out what that looks like for you and your partner, because you're in this together. You're a team when it comes to finances, especially if, like me, you have combined finances. That really is a joint effort, because your money isn't your money or my money. It doesn't matter who makes more. It all goes into our money pool, and this is what we fund our lives with. Number two, and very similarly, you have to understand each other. You have to know what is important to each other. We made these mistakes early on in life, and you learn from mistakes, right? And I did learn from these mistakes, is that I was, the saver in our relationship, and I could care less about spending $10, $11 a month on Spotify. I really don't think that's a necessity. There's the radio if you want to listen to music. There's other sources of free entertainment. You can look it up on YouTube. There's all kinds of workarounds to that. But music is important to my husband. It is one of his passions in life, and it really helps him to think and do his best work. So he got a Spotify account early on in our marriage, and I never could understand this. I was frustrated half the time because, one, we weren't making a lot at the time, so we were always low on funds, but two, because I didn't understand that it was important to him, and I couldn't see, because it wasn't important to me. I thought that it wasn't important to anybody. And I know that sounds really selfish when you say it out loud, but start saying stuff like that out loud. Start asking those types of questions with your spouse or significant other. What is the most important thing to you to buy? And aside from food and necessities, utilities, those kinds of things, aside from the things you have to buy, what would you spend your money on next? Pick out of our bills, what would be the next important current bill that we have? And one of my husband's would be music. I didn't understand that it was important to him. Another one would be eating out. I kind of like eating it. I love getting, I like leftovers. Not a lot of people do, but I really like leftovers. I think food tastes better, after, a day in the fridge, when it's had time to marinate. But that's just me. That's not everybody. And my husband, God bless him, he's not the planning type. He doesn't like to plan out his meals ahead of time. If we're going somewhere, we will inevitably stop and eat somewhere first, because he did not think ahead to eat at the house before we left. He thought, oh, we'll grab something on the way. That's just how he works. And you know what? It's convenient to him. It has its own benefits in that it makes leaving less chaotic, but it is important to him in a way that it is not important to me. That is the thing to understand here. I like the planning of meals. I like to, make and save extras for my meals. And I like the process of eating leftovers. I like the fact that we don't waste a lot of food. So if eating out is something that is important to him, that's cool. I can plan, and as long as we've got the money to do it without overspending, I can plan on making a few less meals for him throughout the week, and he can eat out. And usually this is not like dinner. It's breakfast on his way to work, or it's lunch while he's at work. So, those are just two examples of things that were important to him that I really just don't get. It's not important to me, so I don't really deep down understand it. Now, I have lots of things on my end too that he doesn't understand. I really like to garden. It's something I've gotten into in the past couple of years, but I visit a garden center every single weekend. Sometimes through the week I visit a different one right by my work or something like that. If I need a brain break, that's where I go. And chances are I might come out of there with a plant. I like spending money on mulching our lawn. I like spending money on shrubs and trees to make things look nice. I like making the big plans and then seeing them through to completion, step by step by step, and that takes money. So he may not understand it, but it makes me happy. I have a whole jungle in our living room that makes me really, really happy. And it's something that he would never spend his money on, but he appreciates that I care about that and that it makes me a happier person. You also have to understand each other's money tendencies, like what your personalities are. I mentioned I'm the saver in our relationship. Saving comes easily to me. Saving equals security. To him, he's more willing to spend more quickly than I would be. He's not reckless with his spending, but he will spend for convenience. He's not a penny pincher. I was always the penny pincher. I was the couponer. I was the person who would drive 15 miles to save 10 cents on gas. But I'm learning that that's not really a great way of life anymore. I think I've made a couple videos on that if you want to go check those out. But he is more of the person who is more readily available to spend money than I am. That's something I have to understand about him, because that's what makes him want to eat out more often. I don't think it's worth spending the money. He thinks it's totally worth spending the money. We also have to understand our strengths and weaknesses, because I guarantee one out of the two of you is going to be better at budgeting than the other. I am the budget nerd in our family. I love spreadsheets. I do spreadsheets for a living, and I just like it. I'm the nerd. I love it. And he's not so much good at that. He does great at spreadsheets, but sitting at a computer and working on stuff like that is not something that thrills him. And that works out great for us, because then I can handle the finances. I'm the one interested, obviously, as according to this YouTube channel. I'm interested in money. I'm interested in building wealth. I'm interested in how these systems work. And he really has no interest in learning a lot about these things on his own. I can learn them. I can find out what is cool for us, what works for us, what I want to try out, and I can try out my things, and I can keep him informed the whole time. And he's like, cool, that's awesome, great. I'm glad for you, baby. We benefit from this. And it works out that way because, of our money personalities. We just have to know that about each other. The big one, communication. So communicating is often where we fall short, right? You both need to know exactly what is going on. Excuse me, right there. When one person knows about what's going on and one person doesn't, and I'm not talking like one person's more involved than the other. I just described to you the situation that we use, and I am more involved in it than my husband is, but he knows what's going on. He knows what bills we have every month. He is linked to every bank account that we have together, except for our personal individual bank accounts that hold our personal individual money. And he knows, like, he's capable of looking up anything he wants to look up. There are no secrets in it. I think I mentioned in a prior video that when we were doing Dave Ramsey's envelope system, when we first learned how to manage our money, we had to use the physical envelopes. And I would, a habit that I had was to kind of squirrel away money here and there secretly and not tell him about it, because I thought, if I could just save this much every week, then we could, pay for something we really want to do. And because money was scarce, that seemed like a great idea. But it was a terrible idea, because what it did was close off the channels of communication between me and my husband. And it was a lie, pretty much. I mean, we would both maybe suffer a little bit because there was something we didn't want to, we didn't get to buy that week because of the money that I held back. But it wasn't a good situation. It's not ever good to lie to your spouse about those kinds of things, especially if you are in a situation like us where your money is pooled together. And there's lots of ways you can communicate. You don't have to do the formal budget meeting, although that's what we like to do now that we've got a little bit more into wealth building, because I think things get a little more complex, and I, for one, do better in personal meetings than I do in other types of communication. But if email works for you, do email. If texting works for you, do texting. Send a smoke signal, for all I care. Just the point is, get communicating with your spouse about money. It doesn't, and it shouldn't be awkward. You should both know what's going on. You should both feel confident in saying that. You should both be unafraid to look at your finances, because you know and are controlling what is going on in your finances. All right. One of the last points I have to make is to know how to compromise. This is a key skill, because you're not always going to see eye to eye. You're two different people. And like I said, you're going to have different strengths and weaknesses. You're going to have different outlooks on money. There's lots and lots of examples. I can think of almost every couple I can think of has a saver and a spender, right? There are two different types of people, and they always end up married to each other when it comes to money. And you're going to have to know how to mitigate those differences in a compromise. For us, knowing how to compromise meant, well, let me just tell this story. It was one of the very first times that we did a budget, and we had decided on $10 a week as an allowance for each of us. We had our own bank account set up, and we thought, $10 a week is going to be our money, and that's the money we're going to spend on eating out if we eat out, and that's the money we're going to spend on, anything personal that we buy that the other person doesn't benefit from. And, a few days later, my husband calls me and he's like, "Hey, this isn't working. I feel frustrated. This sucks." And I was like, "Yeah, it does suck. But, look at how much we're doing. Look how much we're actually paying our bills. Look at how much better that our planning has gotten when it comes to our finances." And he's like, "Yeah, but, that sucks. Can we just up it maybe? I need us to up it a little bit." And I was like, "Okay, well, we can't do, like $50 a week for each of us. That's $100 a week. We weren't making that kind of money." But he was like, "Okay, well, what if we just up it to $20 a week?" And guess what? Since 2016, $20 a week has been our personal budget. Now, we do take some of those personal expenses, like eating out of our joint account now that we're making more jointly. And that personal money goes into different things now. But it was an instance where we were able to communicate our needs, what was important to us, and what needed to happen for both of us to be happier. Another instance is when it comes to debt. I have been, up to this point, really debt averse. We followed Dave Ramsey for a long time, and his whole shtick is that you shouldn't get into debt. Well, 2018 rolls around. We had been in our apartment for 7 years, I believe, and we had a little girl at the time. She was about 5, and my husband's like, hey, I think it's time we start to look for a house. And I'm like, cool, but we can't pay for a house. And he's like, I know, but we can finance a house. And I thought, I don't know about that. I don't like the idea of debt. I wanted to save that 20% down payment before I got a mortgage, and we didn't have that ready. And it just didn't feel appealing to me. It felt risky. Well, I'm glad we talked it through, because even though it felt risky to me, he was like, we're growing out of this apartment. It was sub-level. There wasn't a lot of light, and I'm practically a plant. I need light to survive and be happy. So my quality of life was really low when it came to that aspect. We didn't have a yard for the kids to play in. We could go outside, but we didn't have our own space, our own yard. I got into gardening, right? So I would be able to do that. He was like, we need our own space, and we need more space than what this little 2-bedroom apartment has provided us to this point. It was great up until that point, but when it got to that point, he was like, it's time. So, we looked around, and we saw what we could afford, and we looked at the houses that we could afford with the payment, and we ended up finding a house right away. Like super right away. We found a house and we loved it, and we were like, hey, this is it. So we got a house. And even though I was really adverse to that debt at first, I am so glad we did it when we did it for a couple reasons. One, I'm glad that the quality of life that we've had for the last 3 years is so much better than it would have been. I would have been miserable. Our family wouldn't have been able to grow the way it has, and if it had grown, we would have been even more cramped than we were in our apartment already. And the way the housing market has gone up in the past few years, it is so much better for us that we decided to buy a house back in 2018 before everything went absolutely bonkers in the housing market than for us to have waited till we could save up that 20% down payment, which would have been years and years, honestly, on the income we were making at the time. It just wouldn't have been good for us to wait. It was worth it to us to get that debt and move onward. So those are just 2 examples of how we compromised in the past. I'm sure we have a lot more. I'm sure you have a lot more. And that's about it. So let's just kind of do a recap real quick. To communicate effectively about your finances, you really need a shared vision. You need to know how to communicate. You need to know what is important to each other. You need to understand each other's money personalities, your spending habits, and you need to know how to compromise. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please just give it that big old thumbs up so that it helps our channel out, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.